Today, well, we're talking about community empowerment through sustainable tourism. There was a previous session which touched upon this, and I really wanted to emphasize why community tourism is really important. So just before I ask my esteemed panel to introduce themselves, well, I can tell you who I am. I've been a journalist for 25 years. I'm someone who works in travel, and I work very, very hard to help people understand the power of tourism as a climate solution. And at COP, this is my first COP, lots of topics have and haven't been touched upon. I'm glad to see that food systems and health are coming into the conversation, but tourism and travel rarely gets a seat at the table when it comes to climate solutions. 1 in 10 people globally is employed in tourism. That's a WTT stat from 2019. That's set to grow potentially to 1 in 5 people. 8 billion people in the world. That's a lot of people who rely on tourism and tourism money. Now, it was so wonderful to hear from our indigenous friends from Ecuador. But why do we need to support them? How do we support them through travel? Think about that. I'd love you to really think about everything we say and think, how can I change how I live my life? And I will just reference earlier in the panel, someone said there was a hotel in the Maldives that was totally sustainable, I quote them. Now I'm going to scrutinize and interrogate that because that's what I do as a journalist. Language matters. How do we define totally sustainable? Right, Maldives, 3% of their labor force is women. Their biggest export after fish? Kerosene, aviation fuel. The actual hotel, I've been to that property. It's wonderful. I've been into the back engine. I've looked at the guts of how they operate it. Thousands of liters of diesel used a day to operate that. So I think we need to be really, really careful about the language we use when we say something is totally sustainable. And just really, on balance, think about how can tourism positives outweigh the negatives? Why does it matter? There's so much performative sustainability, that's what I call it, around. You know, it's lovely that I've got sustainable shower gel in my bathroom in Dubai, but it's not going to change the world. So I hope that we can really go deep, talk about why community empowerment is important through sustainable tourism. And well, Riva, introduce yourself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juliet, for that very honest and important introduction. And I think all of us here at COP need to constantly be making that challenge and challenging ourselves of why we are here and why we flew here, some of us, to be here, and if it's important enough to be having this discussion, and I think it is. Just as a brief introduction, I'm Riva. I'm a sustainability consultant in my day job, and I'm also very passionate about placemaking, which is the idea of activating fun, vibrant, and community-oriented public spaces. And I've been working with the Extreme Hangout team here in Dubai to help them do that in the Middle East as well. So thank you for having me on the panel and really looking forward to the discussion.
Let's have a good, robust discussion. Yeah. Always honest. Painful. Let's make people wince. I like to get a little wincing out of the audience. Ed, tell us about you and
thanks, Juliet. So I'm a development manager with Extreme Destinations, and another part of the wider Extreme community. I started my career as a safari guide, working at the forefront of community conservation initiatives in northern Kenya, which enabled me the absolute privilege to live and work alongside the Samburu. Having done that for 5 or 6 years, I moved to Oman and developed luxury camping experiences in the deserts, up in the mountains. Before deciding I should probably settle in one place. So retrained as a chartered surveyor, specializing in hotels. I know, God, yuck, having been outside my entire life, but now working with Extreme, hopefully bringing those two operational and professional elements together.
Right. Nicole.
Hi, yes, thanks for having me, and thank you to the Extreme family for facilitating this discussion. I've had the pleasure of working for Beyond Travel for 24 years now. I started as a bean counter accountant, so I'm a little bit of a numbers nerd, but now I have the privilege of telling the story of this amazing brand. We exist across 3 continents. We are a bespoke tour operator and operate 29 small lodges and camps, most mostly in Africa, but one in Chile, and we've just opened our first property in Bhutan. So really, really interesting destination. Community is at the center of our model because we exist in some of the world's most precious places, and those places, like we heard Domingo say, wouldn't exist if it wasn't for those people. So it needs to be relevant to them.
Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. And I think, one of the biggest things we need to look at, and it doesn't get talked about enough again, with sustainability, it's not about solar panels and transitioning to green energy. It's not just that. It's the economics. It's the economics of sustainability. So we will really get into that. Thank you. Joao, thank you for being here from Portugal.
Hello, good morning everyone, or afternoon. It's still morning in Portugal, sorry. I am Joao Dinis. I am the director for the Climate Action and Innovation Department in the city of Cascais. I've been working there for a bit over 15 years, and I started on sustainable development. I moved on with a lot of participatory and governance projects, and that kind of drove my inspiration to manage the climate strategy. So basically, I'm responsible for making sure that we are actually developing some strategies and implementing them. So luckily, we've been doing that on both adaptation and mitigation. We are the first municipality in Portugal to have an adaptation action plan and the first one to have a carbon neutrality roadmap. So things are challenging in some ways, but you can see for my loss of hair, but they're driving forward, so I'm happy for that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. If anyone's playing COP28 jargon bingo, we can knock off mitigation and adaptation and carbon neutrality. No, it's good. It's important. I'm joking. But I think about language a lot, and we have to use these terms with intention. Joao and I have spoken before. He absolutely is. Adaptation is key. But this is really what I want to bring home, is the importance of using language with meaning, especially in the climate conversation and tourism. I just see people using it and not thinking about it. Let's talk, before we get into all of this, let's talk about why do we love travel? Why should we all travel? And why is it something we should all do? I mean, everybody here does it. So why don't we start with you? We'll start with you, Riva.
Yeah, I think, Juliet, you've touched on this, but before I get to your question, I think we should kind of address the elephant in the room, and we did address this a bit in the last panel, which is that travel and tourism is a highly emissive industry. And in order to continue to justify why we need to travel, we need to think of it in relation to that context. Why do we travel, and why do I continue to justify my travel? I think it's because people travel to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. And that is very related to the sustainability mission, because sustainability is one of the first challenges that our generation, my generation, has had to face. That is something bigger than themselves. And I think not only, but through travel, you can get experience and exposure of something that is beyond you and your home in London or in Dubai, and meet people, collaborate with people, build networks, and live firsthand, albeit for a short period of time, another life. And I think that's part of the reason why people travel and why it's important for sustainability overall.
Yes, it's true. It really kicks the myopia of not only seeing through things through our own personal perspective. Travel's vital. Joao, why else is travel vital?
Travel is vital so we can meet more people, meet our world, see how the world is engaged. And I would say that the most important thing about traveling is that it creates opportunities for your own individual growth, and you can actually, at the same time, give something back. It can be something that you are giving to the world that you're traveling now. So you give more insights, you get more insights, you exchange, you foment this diversity, and you're part, like you said, of something much bigger than you are individually. So you also grow. Everyone grows with that, I would say.
Yeah, it's balance, isn't it? How are the positives outweighing the negatives? I think today I was saying to someone back at the Evening Standard, where I also work, saying, I need to justify my ROE, my return on emissions. I've just coined that for you. Let's run with it. So, Nicole, why is travel, and particularly, can you help us define what is community-led travel and tourism?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, just listening to Domingo and Teresa.
Joao. Domingo was our Ecuadorian friend.
No. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
I need to clarify just for me.
But before this, and talking from an African context, there are many communities that would sit with similar stories around sort of why travel is important if it's done correctly, if the benefits flow directly to the stakeholders that are there to conserve these precious places. So for me, community-led tourism is one where the economic benefits flow, and also one where they are participative in the experience. If you travel to a place and you have no contact with somebody who's from there, no experience, you could be anywhere, you should be asking why you have stayed there, because one, you've lost something out of the experience, but two, you've cheated the rest of the people that live there, and so desperately want to share their beautiful place and their beautiful culture with you. So for me, community-led tourism is inclusive, both economically, but also from a participation perspective.
It's brilliant. I mean, for me, yeah, community-based tourism is when it's, for me, ideally owned and run and benefits the community, but it's rare that it's owned. By the way, fun fact, does anyone know who owns Hard Rock Hotel as a hotel brand? Yeah. Indigenous people, actually American. I know, I love a fun fact. But it's not often you're going to stay in a hotel that is genuinely owned by indigenous people. So we always have to think about who owns them. Going back to the Four Seasons Maldives, does anyone here know who owns that? Bill Gates, Cascade Investment, and Prince Al Wahid from Saudi. We need money to flow down into communities. We don't just need to make rich people richer when we travel.
Oh, yeah.
So Ed, you've got a lot of experience firsthand of seeing community tourism in action and its benefits.
And actually what you've just said is a lovely segue. I worked for a company called Sarara Wilderness, who created the incredible Sarara camp in North Kenya, 500,000 hectares, that is completely community owned. Pioneers like Ian Craig and Piers Bastard identified the need to protect these wilderness areas that were decreasing. So came in and worked directly alongside communities, engaged them to help and assist in creating a lodge that was owned by them and is still owned by them, and to show them and create a framework for them to safeguard their natural assets, to understand the benefits of the wildlife that they live amongst, and not just see it as something that can be part of a conflict of their traditional nomadic way of life. So, yeah.
And I think, and Nicole mentioned she's a numbers nerd. That's what it comes down to. We do have to quantify the value of any tourism business in terms of the number when it comes to the biodiversity, when the people it benefits, how many people stay in that. So I do think numbers nerdery is a good thing. There are other benefits to creating and connecting with community through travel. You talked about placemaking. Tell us a bit about why that's important?
Yeah, and I think just drawing on the numbers are important. Numbers definitely are important, and as a consultant, I think they are. But the stories and the community and the feelings and the thoughts are also equally as important, and that's why tourism and travel is something that's worth talking about today. In terms of placemaking, which, as I mentioned, is the idea of generating public spaces that are driven by the community, what we've found and what we've seen is that places that market themselves as destinations that are sort of things that tourists can tick off tend to be quite far away from that community empowered. This is a place that you want to go, you want to not just experience as a passive bystander, but sort of contribute to and engage with. And that's what the idea of placemaking and a placemaking approach to planning and to development can be. So we've seen, for example, in Bryant Park in New York, which is a recent, actually not that recent, 30 years recent redevelopment, they worked with the community and also the people who use the park frequently, so that included people from the offices and it also included tourists, talking to them, finding out what they wanted to enjoy, meant you now see people playing chess and playing ping pong, tourists from all over the world, as well as someone on their office break, for 5 minutes. And that is speaking to the community, finding out something simple, light, quick, cheap that they can put out, and helping people have a happier and more engaging time with that space.
That's brilliant. That's so dialogue and listening to and Nicole mentioned the importance of stakeholders. Coming back to that idea of the socio-economic importance of connecting with community. You mentioned Bhutan. I was lucky enough, I must admit, to be in that very property. It's amazing, a couple of weeks ago in Bhutan. And what's so key when you look at Bhutan and young people, 1 in 7 young people in Bhutan is leaving to go live in Australia because of the money. Right? You create a luxury hotel and you bring in high net worth and luxury spenders, that leaves money there, it keeps them in their community, and it keeps them in their rural areas. Many, many benefits. How else, Nicole, if you were to elaborate on that, can tourism revenue fund community-led climate solutions?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a story of the community nearest to us in the Masai Mara in Kenya, a little bit south from where you were, Ed. It's a story of a community that was, it's a Maasai community, and they were traditionally nomadic, but have now been given stakeholder land. This land is in a forest, the Enwakweri forest, which is sort of protects the water systems that flow into the Masai Mara. So some extreme biodiversity just there itself that's not necessarily protected. This has happened in about the last 20 years or 30 years, in the early 90s, that they've been given this land. And quite a lot of that forest has been deforested in that time. They have started to notice the changes to their environment from the trees being cut down. And so the community has formed a trust that is trying to increase the number of other landholders in the area to join them to bank on tourism and some of the alternate revenue streams that come from looking after the biodiversity in that area so that the trees don't get cut down. And so we as an organization are wanting to come alongside to make sure that they are successful in their mission to generate economics from the forest, not consumptive from the forest, in terms of they've valued the cost of a tree in charcoal is around $63. So really quite small if you think about the number of tourists coming through and what they pay for park fees in a day. The incremental cost of to give them some sort of conservation experience in that forest to replace the cost of the tree is relatively easy compared to what they would have to do to cut it down. So we're working with them to, 1, reforest, and 2, to generate alternative tourism-based revenue streams that will allow them to replace their Maasai economics, which came from cutting down trees, to actually keeping the trees, that the trees are beneficial. So they've identified giant pangolin in their project, and so there's a whole lot of community employment coming in terms of conservation and community rangers. There's a whole range of different economic activities that are happening around that forest because the community have decided that that forest is important.
They see the value and they understand
value.
Instead of consumption, but custodians.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to have a conversation, even in your own community back home, is how has your life changed in the last 10 years as a result of climate? Because I think we all have those stories, and these communities are almost closer to it in terms of their wisdom lives there. I mean, we can learn a lot from them. We definitely don't have to do it for them. It's around coming alongside and working with them because they know the answers.
So I'm sustainability editor of Condé Nast Traveler, and I have a climate travel related column. Actually, the last one was about and beyond. And on Instagram, I always get trolled, and lots of people say, "Oh, I'm not going to waste a second thinking about climate." And I just think if they traveled a bit more and got out and maybe met the communities on the front line and heard, they would realize how uncomfortable that makes us who have seen the effects. Ed, I know you have an extensive experience of seeing that benefit, but also, Joao, you live in a protected nature reserve in Portugal, so you really see that value.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the screen, you can write down Cascais on Google, see the images, and you'll see how it is. We're more or less 100 square kilometers. 1/3 of them are protected landscape, a mountain range protected landscape, And we have 30 kilometers of coast. We have 17 beaches. Actually, now 16 thanks to climate change. This is true, unfortunately. But what that means...
You mean because the water's retreated, so there's more beach?
It changed the sedimentation process. So, for example, it's as simple as, very briefly, how did a beach disappear in Kashkash, right, due to climate change? We have been noticing that the sediments have changed, the dynamics. So what happens is you go to the beach, you have sand there, you stay there a lovely time, you have a lifeguard, you have a bar, you can have some ice cream. But because of this changes, you have less and less sand. So you tend not to go there because there's less sand. And then you go there, and then there's a bit of sand, and then you don't go anymore. So eventually, people didn't go anymore. And what happened was, the concessionaire just said, I don't want to explore this beach anymore. Who would apply? And then the National Environmental Agency removed the classification of the beach. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute, we literally lost the beach. And if you go there today, there's no sand at all. And this has been going on, this was like a 15-year process. Not 50 years or 100, it was 15 years. And it was quite impressive. But I live now near that beach, by the way, as you well know. So it's a lovely place to be. What happened there is we do have still some challenges. 1/3 of that protected landscape, also classified as UNESCO heritage, is a mountain range landscape. It's a beautiful place to do. You have plenty of activities. And what we notice is that a lot of the hotels, and some of my friends that grew up there, kind of noticed, like, you know what? A lot of people actually are more keen to go to this mountain ranges than staying at the beach. So what happened is people were turning their backs on this heritage, and now they're turning their fronts to it. So as a member of the community, I live there since forever. I live in a house built by my great-great-great-grandparents, and apparently even before that they were there, but not on that house. Actually, 2 members of my family were born in that street. So, and what happens is that there's a big change there. There was a big change, and now we're going back to the principles of let's engage the community, let's empower the community, and let's make sure that the heritage where we live is actually treasured. So I'm very fortunate to be part of the community and be part of the change as well. So I can bring some insights to it, or good lobbying, let's call it that way. What we've been seeing is that people have been doing more trekking. They've been doing some activities, for example, environmental preservation. So instead of just going to the beach and just relax like a snail in the sun, no, snails don't go in the sun, like a lizard in the sun, you can actually do a morning where you plant some native species, and with your families, with your colleagues, and we bring you out some water, some drinks, and we explain what you're doing. So you're not stuck inside a museum. You're in a living museum, and you're actually building that museum. So that's the things that we are trying to engage, and we're successfully engaging all the communities and all the tourists.
And do you share the stories like the beach is disappearing? I always think it's bringing it home through that relatability. That's one of the other benefits of travel. If people come and visit and you say, you know, in the Maasai, I mean, it is like 80% less animals than it was 50 years ago. Saying that really brings it home.
Imagine this. We're here in Dubai. Imagine that you go to the Future Museum, right? Imagine that you actually bring a piece and leave it there in that museum. Okay, that's what you're doing in Kashkash with environmental and sustainable tourism. I heard the lovely opportunity, we all heard our previous speakers, and that's actually what they're fomenting. You can be part of a beautiful change. You just have to think beyond yourself. So those trolls are not thinking beyond themselves, and make sure that you, or in this case, I, give you the opportunity, if you go to Kashkash, that you understand the impact that you have as a tourism, as an individual, and the difference that you have to take. So nowadays, you see a lot of activism, and I really appreciate the activism, and I'm an activist myself, but when it comes to climate, you must remember all the time, never forget that people out in the street must be your allies. And when you're talking about tourism, it's the same thing. You cannot just tell someone like, oh, you're not really being a sustainable tourist. You're not doing any difference. No. Let's take it back. These are the opportunities that are given to you. Take one, take two, be part of the change, and people will engage. You're creating allies.
You mean the way we speak about climate and the way we talk about things? I always, as a journalist, I always say I try and talk about anything in a way that makes people open up and expand to new ideas, rather than make them feel wagging a finger, making them feel guilty, and then they contract and they don't listen to you. But I think being in nature and actually experiencing the positive impact from travel is a fantastic way.
And being part of that impact.
Yes,
Being part of
exactly. Actually, part of the solution. Ed, you have experience of that also.
Yeah, and actually just following on from Joao, Extreme Destinations are involved in a super exciting project in Portugal, about 45 minutes south of Porto, inland, a little town called Agada, and we've been able to partner with the Forestry Commission of Portugal, and we're building a really exciting mountain bike-led destination and working with both the Forestry Commission but also the local communities to get involved in reforestation as those trails develop over the land. So just following on from that reforestation, regeneration piece, that's something that's really exciting.
So what would our advice be to anyone who wants to support this kind of positive impact-led tourism and community-led tourism? How do we know that our hosts or who we're booking through is doing really good things? Particularly if I wanted to support Cascais and the conservation of your coastlines, how might I know what businesses to book?
Okay, so in case of Cascais, when you go to a tourist office or when you go to your hotel, you're given, I would say, different tourism products catalogs. So you have the coast, the sun and the beach. You can go there, and you don't need necessarily just to stay there and swim for a bit. You have, for example, some sporting activities. There's a lot of surfing there. It's super crowded nowadays, but super nice still. So, but what you are given is not just information about what you can do, is where exactly are you going. So we have this reef. There's this beach that has a special reef, and if you surf there, it's maintained through the benefits that it's given to you as a sports person, right? If you go inland, for example, for the mountain range, if you're doing mountain biking, for example, you're actually engaged in the trails. You are fomenting the trails and the qualification of these trails that therefore protect all the other surrounding areas. If you go, for example, in Guincho Beach, in our dune system, where we have 5,000 people a day, people finally, due to that tourism activity, people are finally understanding the relevance of preservation of our coastal dunes, for example. And people love that. Why? Because it's so different from everything that you can do in any other, for example, in our case, European city. And again, if you go there, you're invited by one of my colleagues, and you say, hello, what's up for today? Do you have an hour? Would you like to help us plant something here? So it's quite interesting that we have this integrated approach, and it works really, really well.
And presumably you're promoting little independent suppliers and businesses so that the money is staying. Because leakage is a big term in tourism. Typically, what is it the UN WTO says? For every $100 spent in tourism, only $5 stays in local destinations. So it's really that transparency and going back to that leaving money, I think. And I know, obviously, particularly with Portugal, I said 1 in 10 people. Portugal's heavily reliant on tourism as a nation. And also, we need to redistribute our spend, don't we? So not just go to the popular places in high season, such as the Algarve, but going into the areas which might have less tourism and seeking those out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what happened recently in Cascais is that the world discovered us. So now we're known.
The World Surf Championships, whatever it was, a couple of years ago, helped.
It did. So everybody knows Cascais nowadays. But actually, there's so much diversity in Portugal, as it is here in the Emirates, for example. Beautiful culture that you have to go there and engage. And if you engage as a business developer, you will get a lot more opportunities, because you're not just offering you a stay, for example, as an hotel. You're offering a wonderful experience, inspiring experience. You can actually make a difference. And when we started this conversation, when we were speaking about you can help something to grow, you can go beyond yourself, as you were saying, businesses can actually develop that idea and that framework. And I think that's the line to go that we're trying to push forward.
Riva, do you have thoughts on how can we determine who the good hosts are, who really are supporting their communities?
Yeah, I have 2 answers that are from 2 sides of what I do. One is I now read sustainability reports, and that might be a little bit nerdy and a little bit out of. But if you're about to book a hotel, I can tell you the top 5 days, you open the sustainability report, look at what their targets are they validated, are they realistic, have they gone down on their emissions? You can do the work, and if you care, you can start, opening a book and starting to do it. The other thing that I would do is just talking to people. That's another way to engage with the community and empower a community, is to be in the place, and instead of acting like you are, as I said, a consumer of a service, acting like you are a guest in the place that you're visiting, and be respectful and engaged and curious about their life in that place that you are, that they are a steward of and you are a visitor or a guest of.
Curiosity, definitely. I'm always encouraging that, and the exchange of understanding and respect, I think, is a word in travel that we need, a respect for who we're visiting. Nicole, I know that Ambion does a very impressive impact report. It's really one of the best. I mean, it's like this big. I know you don't print off many, there's digital copies. But yes, what else would you say really betrays or demonstrates that you are supporting communities and leaving money with locals?
I think there's probably a couple of questions you can ask when you're choosing, but there's also some tests you can do when you're physically there. So there's a lot around the images on the website. What does the place look like? Have they celebrated a sense of place and community? Are you able to tell where you are by what the pictures look like? So in some due diligence, just with your eyes. And then when you're on the ground, like, who's serving you? Where are they from? What's their story? You'd be able to tell very, very quickly whether a community is involved in the operations of that organization or not, specifically in our context. So like you would have seen in Bhutan, 80% of the staff that we recruited for that new property, some of them were the first jobs in hospitality. They come from the village just as you drive into the property. So you will feel that. You might even feel it that the service wasn't 100% perfect in terms of white glove and silver service, but you would have felt some of the heart. And again, looking at a destination and where you travel to make your travel count, what do you want to learn? Which cultures do you find interesting? What gaps do you have that you think you could fill by traveling somewhere, so that there is a real reason that you're going to care and you're going to learn, and then I think you can really make your travel count.
And I think a lot of us in tourism obviously realize that sustainability probably isn't good enough, sustaining the way things are. We need to regenerate when it comes to nature. We need to regenerate when it comes to economies. Nature and people, the two are interlinked, obviously. So we want to be supporting both through tourism. Final reflection, and then we'd love to open to questions if you have any hard, difficult, challenging questions for my panel. A final reflection on the importance of looking after community and also nature and how they're connected. Ed, do you want to answer that?
Communities and nature, in my experiences, are intrinsically interlinked. Throughout every place I've been lucky enough to travel, the community shapes the destination as much as the landscape, as much as the flora, the fauna. And involving communities, giving them the impetus to take ownership of their natural assets, for me is so important, and providing a framework for them to do so is crucial.
Well, King Charles did when he opened at COP, in his speech, he talked very much about nature-based solutions and the power for luxury travel to fund and facilitate nature-based solutions really is huge, and I really would ask everyone to understand that better. Nicole, you can speak to that better than...
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk climate often gets talked into a silo, but it's not a silo. It's like biodiversity and people are almost the other two legs of the stool, and are just as important. So if we lose biodiversity, we'll have more climate problems, and people are at the heart of conserving the biodiversity and the places that are so much needed to be preserved and regenerated, as you've said. So the three go very, very much together, and tourism is a very, very important economic outflow to conserve biodiversity, and in order for that to happen, the benefits have to flow to the people and the stakeholders around those areas. There's just no other way of saying that, and so it has to be done right in order for those places to be cared for. There's a wonderful report that's been done by African Leadership University on the state of the wildlife economy. They've used wildlife as a sort of keystone species for large habitat. But there's 5 economic, they call it their big 5 economic outflows that are needed to ensure that biodiversity is maintained. And it really comes down to making sure that the stakeholders around those areas receive the benefit from conserving them. So it includes ecotourism, so tourism done correctly, and it includes non-timber forest products like honey and medicinal plants. It includes wildlife ranching, it includes hunting, and it includes carbon, which is, I guess, what the nature-based solutions would come from. And when you start to value nature, you start to put and this is the bean counter in me coming out, when you actually start to value the tree or you value something, then it all of a sudden becomes relevant to a whole lot more people. It starts coming into policy, it starts coming into a much wider discussion. And then climate is addressed at the same time because it's linked.
I mean, they say it's the flip side of the same coin. I mean, a lot of people don't even realize, here we are at COP28, a lot of people don't realize there's an entire conference dedicated to biodiversity. It took place 3 weeks also in Montreal, but lots of people don't, it doesn't make the headlines in the same way. And I think people, I'm going to mumsplain for the audience just in case, biodiversity, because people just, it is the interconnection. I always think it's great to compare it to architecture and construction and design. It's the interconnection of all species, obviously, and you just take one little bolt or nail out of the system, it will collapse. So I think, understanding how can tourism fund and support that, it's what's on our plate. Biodiversity is everything.
And
sorry,
just to add, reflecting on what Domingo and Teresa said, that this panel is about community empowerment, but for Indigenous communities, nature is their community. Biodiversity is part of their community. So by empowering communities, it's not just about funneling money to the people, but it's funneling money to the turtles and the butterflies and the plants as well, and making sure that their histories are conserved and preserved for the future too.
We are nature. Thank you. It's such an important reminder. Joao.
So absolutely. So I have a more or less unpopular opinion, which is this is my 9th COP participation, and I have to say that this green zone is a lot better than the blue zone. Not just this one, but on the previous editions that I went through, for one reason, because we actually are having a lot of people here that are willing to take part of the mission and act on climate action. You are acting, like, you're putting your hands on the dirt and doing things. And you're not talking about what your commitments are, like the ESGs that you mentioned before. Oh, and we have to change this and we have to change that. No, this area is full of people that have that energy and they're implementing them. And basically what I'm trying to tell that you are the communities that can empower your own destinations. And I have to say, I have a blue zone. I've been doing some negotiations as well as a local community. But it's not there here, so it might be unpopular. So how does this reflect to tourism? Well, if you have any action on your field of expertise, on your field of work, on your field of personal interest, just make sure you channel that to add value to your own community and to the businesses that surround you. And that's here in the green zone. That's here. And it's, I would say 90% of it is done here, and it's discussed there. So, in Cascais, just to give you a quick example of how we I've given so much examples, just a quick one. On my action plan, adaptation action plan, I had to completely refurbish or naturalize a riverbed, which now we call as a green corridor, right? And when I sold that, I told him, my boss at the time, still my boss, I told him, like, we have to do this green corridor qualification because, it will increase the flooding area, the sponge capacity. And I've done some math, and apparently in the 20-year flood, we will have absolutely no damage, right? And he was kind of like, yeah, but that costs a lot of money. Okay. 1 week after I came back, you know what? We're going to do a trail of 8 kilometers, and we're going to connect the wonderful coastal area, downtown area of Cascais, to the top of the mountain range, through a beautiful green valley. And I'm pretty sure nowhere else in Europe you will have this type of connectivity between the blue product and the green product and the experience of traveling through that. Okay, how much money? There you go, do that. And we did that.
It's wonderful.
So that's one example, and I'm really happy for that example, just to prove how the narrative that we are trying to do here actually is the best narrative. It's the one that adds more value. So the tourists go there, but the local communities are actually getting the benefit from that, because we had the 2 worst precipitation levels in the last 3 years, and we had absolutely no damage, so the math worked, which is rare for me.
Science.
My science, at least, so it kind of worked. So that's kind of like the inspiration that we're trying, is that promoting biodiversity, nature-based solutions, that's what we did here in this case, promoted both local resilience, the engagement of communities. They use that daily for commuting without using their cars, and a wonderful tourist experience. This is what we call cross benefits, and we added so much. And just to wrap up, what we were trying to do there, I have a jersey from my local team, and we're sponsored actually by the Emirates, the airline company, the Emirates.
I'm aware of their work.
So why can't we bring these companies and sponsor these places or these activities? That's my
So
challenge.
there's something called the transformational triangle. You can GTS, Google that. Transformational triangle, and that for me is the dream in tourism. You have government, you have public, you have private, you have business, and then you have NGOs, and you have people passionate about their causes. We need the transformational triangle, exactly as we started, to each of those 3 sectors to speak to each other, and we don't have enough of that in any sector, but tourism in particular is powerful, isn't it? So local government, for-profit businesses, and as I say, charities and NGOs on the ground. There's something called the Conservation Collective, who I work with, and I connect them to hotels. There's tension there, but you're right. So it's blue zone, and it's green zone, and all the audiences working together. So thank you so much. Have you got anything else to add that you feel passionate about, that you need this audience to know about? No? Please ask some challenging questions. Challenging questions get good answers.
I'm hopefully going to stir up some controversy to start. Firstly, just say thank you for another excellent informative panel. You touched on the fact that the biodiversity and climate crises are intrinsically linked. Is it time, 30 years after we decided that they should be 2 separate conferences, is it time to bring them together?
I think, again, going back, we need everyone in every conversation, you know? It's that awareness. For some reason, biodiversity doesn't have as good a publicist as the climate crisis.
Just to add, we're working on it. The biodiversity is working on it. The science-based targets for climate, which are getting a lot of traction now, they've just released for 17 companies the science-based targets for nature. We mentioned the transformational triangle. We need some corporates doing it, and I think that will kind of move the dial a bit in that way. Also, the TCFD, the Task Force for Financial Climate Disclosures, they've now got the TNFD for nature. We're seeing movement. I think we're behind. I think maybe, hopefully, next COP, it will be higher and higher on the agenda too.
I think we have to just picture nature and biodiversity sitting at every table, just like we do climate. I mean, there are hotel groups that have climate change managers, which I think is progress. Maybe we need, I'm sure you have head of biodiversity, don't you?
Yeah, we have a head of sustainability, impact. We consider planet, people, and community as land, wildlife, people would be our 3 pillars. But I think it would be a really interesting discussion, because I think sometimes just solving for climate, you cause problems for people and nature. And if you put the 2 together, it would be quite interesting to how you manage those trade-offs.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was very interesting, though we joined somewhere in the middle, unfortunately. So I heard that about half of all the travelings happen because of nature. I mean, people are looking for beauty of nature. And on the other side, natural reserves also depend on tourism very much. And there is an idea of, since nature become a source of business for many companies, so there is an idea of putting nature on balance sheets of the companies. So do you see this happening, or if it's not happening, what are the challenges there?
There is nature accountancy, certainly. There's a great book by Dieter Helms, I'm sure you know, Natural Capital. I mean, you do that, don't you?
Well, no, we have, I mean, I don't
there
think,
is a value.
Yeah, there is value. I don't think we've been able to quantify it or develop a system to be able to value it like consistently across like all different areas. So I think
biodiversity credits do exist in the financial sector. I mean, when it comes down to economics, but the problem with that is there are too many variables, and so it becomes really, you know, a whale carries a lot of weight because of its carbon sequestration and all of that. But everything depends on context, as we know. I mean, someone can speak better to that than me, I'm sure. Does anyone? Yeah, nature, value.
I mean, I know from we've got a big reduction program from our own carbon footprint, but like even as a step for us just to get a carbon accounting is a big change, just in terms of our systems and approach, and we're an impact organization, so it helps if there is some people probably way cleverer than me who could tell us a simple metric for nature and what that affects, because everything does have a value when we use water, when we distribute waste. Those all have an impact that should be costed into our operation.
I mean, a good metric, which our friend Domingo touched on earlier, was simply if you preserve and protect land and don't develop it, the value of that versus pouring concrete on it, obviously the built environment being 30% of all carbon emissions, you can, anyone who, even me, I can work that out in terms of maths, that's better. As we know, you know, it's so, as we heard about having different trees in different areas, the value is the coastal preservation. You can't put a number on that. I guess it's hard, isn't it?
It's so difficult to quantify, and ideally the solution is that these areas aren't owned by specific entities to be quantified. They're opened up as migration corridors. The nature aspect is constantly evolving, hopefully in the right direction. But the places that I've had experience in are very seasonal. So in order to quantify areas where there's rains in one location and trees bloom and elephants followed by plains game, followed by predators, you know, it changes on a constant basis. So in my experience, it's been very hard to quantify, but to open it up to larger geographies, to larger areas, that for me is a more exciting thought process.
A simple metric is spend your money with hosts who care about nature and community. Do we have another question? Thank you.
Just one small, quick one. I'm Sunil from Abu Dhabi and a circular economy professional. Is it this conversation to bring all these stakeholders together? Let's say you talked about government, companies, individuals, and all that, right? Is it this thought conversation has been going on for 50 years? In quality, we call it stakeholder engagement. World Economic Forum had that as a theme before COVID. Why isn't it happening? I mean, it's common sense. Facts are in front of us. You're experiencing it.
In 2007, when the global financial crisis happened, there was a big shift in hospitality and travel. It went to becoming a landscape of assets, which performed, as I said, as you know, investments. So it all became about short-term profits. That is the challenge that we've had most recently, is generally, that's why it's really important to look at who owns what businesses. Because I'm afraid most hotels, the hardware exists to make portfolios wealthier. So that's why it's not happening, because they're not interested in longer-term sustainable investment. They're not interested in the nuances of biodiversity and people. So that's why it's really important for us to do our homework and understand which businesses. That's my personal opinion. So that's why it's not happening, because hotels exist to make rich people richer. Sure.
Yeah.
Shareholders. Shareholders. So that's when we look at businesses, it's really important to understand the economics and the ownership of every single business in tourism. That's why I say local people, you know, I went to Canada recently. The Rideau Canal didn't freeze last year because it didn't get cold enough. Think of all those little kiosks, all those people who make their living that time of year, they couldn't. So, you know, it's us caring for all the little individual people, the people that, you know, who we don't really hear about, who don't have the adverts. And it's all the people in our own supply chains.
Yeah.
It's spending that money locally. And just thinking logically, it's common sense. Please, someone else much more informed on this than me.
No, just to add that, unfortunately, this is market-driven. You know, this is an activity that is market-driven, and people don't really understand the benefits of having a conscious selection of products or services within their travel experiences. If we had a bit more of that, and that usually comes through regulation or awareness, it would probably change and it would probably accelerate, leading to less of a problem than what you said before, for example, which should we have a separate, well, probably not, but like I've said before, the green zone is where the action is, you know? So you will act because you will face the impacts very shortly. Remember, we lost the beach in 15 years. What will happen next? And by the way, just out of curiosity, we have the world's oldest tide gauge. So we're measuring the sea level rise and the tides. And in our coast, it has been registered 14 centimeters in the last 100 years, which is a massive amount of water in there. So what happens there, to relate to that, is that when we have a green economy that actually brings incentives for these stakeholders that you mentioned, when this interlink actually adds value to them when compared to the business as usual model, then we will have some traction. And how is this achieved then? Well, first of all, regulation. Second of all, awareness and customer selections. So I would think that local communities, like myself, tourism stakeholders, like myself, could actually advocate and make sure that you, the customer, understand the impact that you as an individual actually have, because it's multiplied by millions. For example, quick example, one thing that cringes my little beard is that when I go to a hotel and I see, save the planet, don't put your towel on the floor. It's like, oh my God.
That was the birth of greenwashing, you know that.
Yeah.
The whole little signs, that's where the term greenwashing came from when Jay Westerfelt in 1986
Oh, really?
called those little signs. That's where it comes from.
Greenwashing, yeah.
It actually comes from that.
You see, I'm learning a lot now. But that's the type of thing that this is not enough. This is misinformation. Why aren't we? Because we pay city tax. Why isn't this being invested in more options, in more sustainable solutions? I want to choose something more green. Why don't I go to a website? Let's skip the publicity. Why don't I go to a website of accommodation, for example, or flights, and I see what is the environmental footprint of the service that I'm selecting? Because I can choose a hotel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars, or 7 here, or I could choose ecological value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why aren't we having this as mainstream option for?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest questions at COP. Absolutely. But think about where your money's going and where that money's being invested. That's a good one. That's a really helpful one. Really, honestly, I can't emphasize it enough. That's great. Well, thank you so much. I've learned so much. Thanks
Juliet,
to everybody.
I was just gonna. I can't let you guys off the stage. We've just touched on green economy, but what about the blue economy? I was lucky enough to grow up on a small island in the Bahamas, and small island communities super rely on the tourism economy. They're also living at the front line of climate change. Cascais has a beautiful coastline. We know that, and we've heard a bit about it today. But I just would love perhaps each of you just to talk a little bit about maybe some of the magic that is happening in the blue economy today and some of the solutions that are coming from the ocean space too, just to finish with. Thank you.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about an example that I've been reading about and come across. The Red Sea Development Company, local to the region in Saudi Arabia. They've published a goal to reach 30% net conservation benefit, which is progress. It's going from let's not destroy it to maybe can we actually have a positive impact. And to do that, they are building mangroves, coral reefs, and looking at novel technologies, innovative technologies to basically artificially grow these sorts of habitats for the blue economy. So turtles is one of the hawksbill turtle is their main sort of endangered species. I think it's amazing progress. It will be interesting to see if those targets are achievable, and it comes back to the question of, everyone keeps talking and saying and what's actually going to happen about it, but it's good to see that people are actually trying to make things happen and setting targets in that way.
I'm Amber. You probably know more about the blue economy than anyone here. But from my perspective, my folks live in a tiny little town on the Kenya coast on the Indian Ocean called Watamu. I don't have as much kind of data on that at all, but from a community perspective, you're definitely seeing a mindset shift in relation to fishing, what communities are being involved in, and again, the benefit of tourism, conservation, and providing alternative opportunities for employment, for education. So that's, from my own experience.
We've got the privilege of having three islands in our portfolio down the east coast of Africa. And so in 2018, we formed a partnership with Africa Foundation, who's our sister organization, a nonprofit that works alongside us. And we partnered in a program called Oceans Without Borders. Reason being because the ocean is one unique system, and actually it's got a lot to do with how our guests live at home that impacts the reefs that they come and stay at directly. So there is a really big advocacy program in terms of talking to guests about the ocean, it's what's threatening it at the moment. But then specifically, we have a really small little island off the island of Zanzibar called Nemba Island. It is the top of the Nemba archipelago, and it is heavily sort of over-visited from tourists from Zanzibar. And so those reefs are taken quite a hammering, both from tourism, but from global warming. So we've started a coral nursery and a lot of community engagement in terms of creating a protected area around those reefs, some alternative reef sites that the community can take tourists to visit to decrease the pressure on the actual main reef, but also a lot of community consultation. Sort of what are they seeing? What are they seeing in terms of fish catch? Is it getting smaller? What are the size of the fishes that they're catching? Why is this happening? And getting buy-in for that protected area to create like a nursery that will help them generate more economic benefits from this. We've also increased the price of them taking out guests to dive on the reef and decreasing the volume. And that has been a long, like 3-year consultative process to get the community to realize that less people can mean the same amount of money. And so that is still a process we're involved in. It's a gritty process. It's not something that happens overnight. I think on the 1st of June, the restricted area came into place, and there's still conversations around getting buy-in around that. So lots and lots of opportunity in the blue economy, and lots of consultation around research, around different sites, because these animals, specifically turtles, whales, they all move. So it's a really exciting place to have a lot of, it's like almost like a lab you could have with guests in terms of talking about climate and biodiversity in one place, and participation, getting them to help plant from the coral nursery onto the artificial reef site. There's some great participative experiences that can be on offer, but the most exciting is to be able to have the conversation as to what you can do when you go home that can make a difference to this place beyond your holiday.
Yeah, just very briefly. 25 years ago, the blue economy in Cascais would be fishing and maybe the marina. I think today the blue economy is surfing. Thousands of surfers visiting Cascais every year for that. It's about the first locally protected by law blue heritage area that was the first tryout for the implementation of the law. So that means that we have diving, that we have a trailing experiences for people that just don't go on the beach. So it's a completely new service or product for those that look for the sun and the water. It also means dune conservation and natural trailing as well. And it all means climate adaptation to sea level rise and coastal erosion. So it's so important that we have that. And I'm not mentioning, for example, the sea foresting activities that we're trying out there to plant algae, to make sure that it has some carbon footprint, positive footprint, and also to reestablish our corals. Well, not corals, we have another name for them, but in Portuguese they mean the same. So there's a lot more diversity here, and there's a lot more opportunities for sustainable tourism. So that's a really good question, because actually we need to do a bit more. Just a bit.
Thanks so much. I'm going to just tell you all about a little story about a hotel. It's the reason I do what I do. It's called Fogo Island Inn in Canada. And it is a tiny island, a population of 2,000 people on the easternmost of the Americas. And in 2017, when I went there, that's why I shifted to sustainability, because of this hotel. It absolutely models community empowerment through tourism. Zita Cobb, the founder, she retired the wealthiest woman in Canada. That helped. But she was born the fifth of 6 children in a house with no running water or electricity to an illiterate mother and father. Her father was a fisherman. The great boats came, the boats fishing, the big industrialized fishing, took all the fish away. That community also sanctions on fishing in the 90s. It lost its industry, everything. So what do these people do? Do they leave Fogo Island? Do they move and go work in a coffee shop in mainland Newfoundland? No, Zita Cobb created a hotel, Fogo Island Inn. It's the economic engine for that community, and it really demonstrates how a community economics model can absolutely save an island community, and the value of that in cultural conservation, in terms of environmental preservation, but more than anything, just demonstrating what she calls economic nutrition. So you know the calorie thing on your cereal box that tells you your calories? Imagine if everything told us where our money went like that. We'll put in Fogo Island, economic nutrition, into Google. Actually, I use Ecosia. That's the search engine I use that plants a tree, Ecosia. And you will see how the power of community economics, particularly for island nations. Thank you so much. Thank you.